The three classes of United States senators are made up of 33 or 34 Senate seats each. The purpose of the classes is to determine which Senate seats will be up for election in a given year. The three groups are staggered so that one of them is up for election every 2 years, rather than having all 100 seats up for election at once. For example, the 33 Senate seats of Class 1 were elected in 2012. The 33 seats of Class 2 were up for election in 2014. And the 34 seats of Class 3 are scheduled for re-election in 2016. The three classes were established by Article 1, Section 3, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution. The actual division was originally performed by the Senate in May 1789 by lot, with the rule being that of states 2 seats had to be in different classes. Whenever a new state subsequently joined the Union, its 2 Senate seats were permanently assigned to 2 different classes by coin toss, while keeping the 3 classes as close to the same size as possible. A senator's description as junior or senior senator is not related to his or her class. Rather, a state's senior senator is the one with the greater seniority in the Senate. This is mostly based on length of service. Historical division. When the Founding Fathers agreed to give 6-year terms to senators, they also decided to stagger the elections, so that a third of the Senate was up for election every 2 years. With this staggered turnover, the Founding Fathers wanted to ensure stability in the Senate, and encourage senators to deliberate measures over time, rather than risk a rapid turnover of the entire chamber every 6 years. At the same time, they wanted more frequent elections, as opposed to waiting every 6 years, to prevent senators from permanently combining for sinister purposes. The 3 classes of the Senate were then specified by Article 1, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Immediately after they shall be assembled in consequence of the first election, they shall be divided as equally as may be into 3 classes. The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the 2nd year, of the second class at the expiration of the 4th year, and of the 3rd class at the expiration of the 6th year, so that 1/3 may be chosen every 2nd year. This was achieved in May 1789, several weeks after the first Senate assembled. Only 20 senators from 10 states were present. North Carolina and Rhode Island had not yet ratified the U.S. Constitution, and New York, because of its late ratification, had not yet selected its senators. To decide on how to implement this, on May 11 the Senate appointed a committee consisting of Senators Ellsworth, Carroll, and Few. In accordance with the recommendation, on May 14 the Senate divided the members into 3 classes. Thursday, May 14, 1789. The committee appointed to consider and report a mode of carrying into effect the provision in the 2nd clause of the 3rd section of the 1st article of the Constitution, reported, whereupon resolved that the senators be divided into 3 classes, the first to consist of Mr. Langdon, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Morris, Mr. Henry, Mr. Izard, and Mr. Gunn, the second of Mr. Wingate, Mr. Strong, Mr. Patterson, Mr. Bassett, Mr. Lee, Mr. Butler and Mr. Few, and the third of Mr. Dalton, Mr. Ellsworth, Mr. Elmer, Mr. Maclay, Mr. Reed, Mr. Carroll, and Mr. Grayson. That 3 papers of an equal size, numbered 1, 2, and 3, be, by the Secretary, rolled up and put into a box, and drawn by Mr. Langdon, Mr. Wingate, and Mr. Dalton, in behalf of the respective classes in which each of them are placed, and that the classes shall vacate the seats in the Senate according to the order of numbers drawn for them, beginning with number 1, and that, when senators shall take their seats from states that have not yet appointed senators, they shall be placed by lot in the foregoing classes, but in such manner as shall keep the classes as nearly equal as may be in numbers. On the following day, May 15th, the term expiration of each class was determined by drawing lots. The Senate proceeded to determine the classes, agreeably to the resolve of yesterday, on the mode of carrying into effect the provision of the second clause of the third section of the first article of the Constitution, and the numbers being drawn. The classes were determined as follows. Lot number 1, drawn by Mr. Dalton, contained Mr. Dalton, Mr. Ellsworth, Mr. Elmer, Mr. Maclay, Mr. Reed, Mr. Carroll, and Mr. Grayson, whose seats shall, accordingly, be vacated in the Senate at the expiration of the second year. Lot number 2, drawn by Mr. Wingate, contained Mr. Wingate, Mr. Strong, Mr. Patterson, Mr. Bassett, Mr. Lee, Mr. Butler, and Mr. Few, whose seats shall, accordingly, be vacated in the Senate at the expiration of the fourth year. Lot number 3, drawn by Mr. Langdon, contained Mr. Langdon, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Morris, Mr. Henry, Mr. Izzard, and Mr. Gunn, whose seats shall, accordingly, be vacated in the Senate at the expiration of the sixth year. Upon the expiration of a senator's term of any length, someone starts a new six-year term as senator. Because each state is represented by 2 senators, regardless of population, each Senate class collectively represents a different number of people than each other Senate class. Since the early 19th century, Class II senators have cumulatively represented between 50 to 60% of the population of the United States, while senators from each of the other 2 classes have cumulatively represented approximately 70 to 75% of the population of the United States. New states. When a new state is admitted to the Union, its 2 senators have terms that correspond to those of 2 different classes. Among the 3 classes defined below, which 2 classes is determined by a scheme that keeps the 3 classes as close to the same size as possible, one that avoids the largest class differing by more than 1 senator from the smallest class. A coin toss determines which new senator enters which of the classes selected to be expanded. This means at least one of any new state's first pair of senators has a term of less than 6 years, and one term is either 2 or 4 years shorter than the other. When the last state was admitted, Hawaii, in 1959, candidates for the Senate ran either for Seat A or Seat B. The new senators, in a process managed by the Secretary of the Senate, drew lots to determine which of the 2 would join the Class 1, and which would join Class 3. Should a 51st state be admitted, it would receive senators in Classes 1 and 2, at which point all 3 classes would have 34 senators. Class 1. Class 1 consists of the 33 current senators whose seats are scheduled for re-election in November 2018, and whose terms end January 3, 2019, and earlier senators with terms that ended in 1791, 1797, 1803, 1809, 1815, 1821, 1827, 1833, 1839, 1845, 1851, 1857, 1863, 1869, 1875, 1881, 1887, 1893, 1899, 1905, 1911, 1917, 1923, 1929, 1935, 1941, 1947, 1953, 1959, 1965, 1971, 1977, 1983, 1989, 1995, 2001, 2007, and 2013. States with a Class 1 senator: Arizona, California, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Hawaii, Indiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. Class 2. Class 2 consists of the 33 current senators whose seats are scheduled for re-election in November 2020, and whose terms end January 3, 2021, and earlier senators with terms that ended in 1793, 1799, 1805, 1811, 1817, 1823, 1829, 1835, 1841, 1847, 1853, 1859, 1865, 1871, 1877, 1883, 1889, 1895, 1901, 1907, 1913, 1919, 1925, 1931, 1937, 1943, 1949, 1955, 1961, 1967, 1973, 1979, 1985, 1991, 1997, 2003, 2009, and 2015. States with a Class 2 senator: Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Colorado, Delaware, Georgia, Idaho, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Oregon, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Class 3. Class 3 consists of the 34 current senators whose seats are scheduled for re-election in November 2016, and whose terms end January 3, 2017, and earlier senators with terms that ended in 1795, 1801, 1807, 1813, 1819, 1825, 1831, 1837, 1843, 1849, 1855, 1861, 1867, 1873, 1879, 1885, 1891, 1897, 1903, 1909, 1915, 1921, 1927, 1933, 1939, 1945, 1951, 1957, 1963, 1969, 1975, 1981, 1987, 1993, 1999, 2005, and 2011. States with a Class 3 senator: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Missouri, Nevada, New Hampshire, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, Utah, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin. List of current senators by class.